Hi everybody, my name is Mo and I work in the CS department here at Inventables, and we are doing our first ever Easel live webinar. This is totally something new. We've never done this before. We're kind of trying it out to see if it's something we want to do in the future, if it's something that people like you find useful when you're learning Easel or trying to get started getting acquainted with your machine. So we thought it might be fun with the holidays coming. We thought we'd do a little project together in Easel. So you can see it behind me here. These are my little Thanksgiving garland that I made. I wanted to have it done, strung up on a string, but for now we're just gonna post it up on this board here. You can kind of get an idea what it looks like. I have a couple things that I want to teach you in Easel, and so I tried to pick a project that would help showcase what I personally think are some of the coolest features about Easel. So I love leaves. Autumn's my favorite season. It was a no-brainer for me. And luckily, working here at Inventables, we have access to all of the materials in our store. We can go in, kind of figure out what we want to use. And I found this piece of wood that I really, really like. Ironically, nobody knows how to pronounce it, but we think it's called Padauk. It's an African hardwood, and you can see it's got this beautiful orange color that we just think is perfect for autumn kinds of projects. So I went and I picked out 2 sheets of that. It's an 1/8 inch thick, so it'd be thin enough for me to hang up on a string if I wanted to and not fall down or be too heavy. And I kind of went to go get some inspiration for my project, and I found a couple things online that I really liked. And so I thought, well, this would be a good time for me to try to make my own version of it. So it's finished now, but I'm gonna walk you guys through some of the steps that I took to help make this garland. So bear with me a second here. I'm gonna share some things with you. One thing that's important to do when you're thinking about how you wanna create your project is to sort of think about it from how you want to build it in Easel. Easel, as I'm sure most of you are aware, is the free software that we offer that is compatible with your machine, whether you have a CARVE or an Xcarve. And not only is it a design program, but it also sends your files to your machine for you. So in thinking about some of the ways that Easel understands designs, I tried to keep that in mind when I was building this project. So what I did, everybody loves Google, especially here at Inventables. It's one of our favorite things. So what I did was I went to Google and I started to think about, well, what kind of a leaf do I want? So with Easel, in this particular project, I was going to use a feature called image import, which allows you to use JPEGs, which are perfect because JPEGs are easily accessible to everybody who has internet access. They're the most commonly used image types for web searches and things like Google Images. So what I went with, pretty simple, I just searched for leaf. And I went to images. And you can see there's no shortage of leaf images in the world. However, not all these images are going to be good when building a project in Easel. Easel works with a black and white kind of gradient design feature that helps Easel better understand what to carve and what not to carve. So anything that is black in Easel will carve all the way out, and anything that is white will not be carved at all. And then anywhere in that gray spectrum will determine the depth of those particular projects. So what I decided to do in my search was search for leaf black white. So this is going to give me a whole bunch of images that have just black and white leaves. Since I don't want anything too complex, because as you could see from my design, anything too complex takes a really long time to carve. And I don't really need my project to have a very intricate design because I really want the material, that orange wood, I really want that to kind of speak for itself. So you can see there are a couple different images here that I could use that are sort of more illustrative that would be really good for carving. So I just had to figure out what kind of a leaf I would like to get. The other thing is that you'll notice some of these pictures have the leaf as a black image and other ones have it as an outline. That's something really important to think about too when you think about how you want your project to come out. In my particular case, I knew that I wanted the leaf to be cut out, so it seems like something like this, where the leaf is an outline, would be a good way to go, right? But as we will get into, there are actually some ways that you can use the image import feature to find a leaf that you like and use that to work as an outline. And that actually is the way that I'm going to show you how to do this, because I think it is probably the wiser way to build an outline with that feature. So let me show you the leaves that I ended up finding. We'll go into my Easel project here, and let's see. Let's start with this one. Since everybody's here, I'll go ahead and delete that. So the feature we're going to be using is called image import. As I talked about, it allows you to import JPEGs into Easel for tracing. So we're going to go ahead and use image trace, and we're going to click upload file. At this point, it allows me to choose the file that I want to select. So I'm going to choose the file from my desktop here, and I'm going to start with this one. Now you'll notice, as I was talking about, this is a filled in shape, right? So right now, if I were to carve this project, my machine is going to carve every part of this leaf. And that's going to take a really, really long time. And it's also not going to give me the effect that I want, right? Because all I want is the outside of this leaf so that I can add a letter in it. So instead, I'm going to set it to trace outlines. And now you will see I have the full outline of the leaf. And this black line here is going to be the path that my bit takes while my machine is running. There are a couple other settings here that are really good to look at when you're importing an image. One of these is threshold. Threshold is probably something that you're not going to see a lot of on this particular project, because my images that I selected are very black and white. There isn't a lot of gray in them. But threshold essentially determines what the image is going to pull and what it's going to render as being carvable and what it's going to render as not being carvable. So in this case, threshold is not going to impact my design a lot. However, smoothing is going to be very useful for me to have in this design, because you can see there are a lot of really sharp edges here. And if you've had some experience carving, you know that sharp edges and bits can be a really tough thing to manage, because the bit cannot quite get into these really narrow areas unless that point is the same diameter as my bit. So in a lot of cases, I use smoothing, and I put that all the way up just to kind of take the edge off some of these sharper corners. So I'm going to go ahead and import this design, and there's my leaf. There it is. All right. So one thing that now that I have my leaf in here, I'm going to start thinking about what kind of a bit I'm going to use to carve this out. You'll see over here in the bit sizes, we've got a couple different bits here selected. If you have a CARVE, you may recognize these bits as being the bits that came with your machine. One thing for people who don't have a CARVE, you might have an X-Carve. I would keep in mind that while we do have these upcut and straight, these do pair with these particular kinds of bits. So this particular bit is an upcut fishtail with a 1/16 inch cutting diameter. But in this case, I don't necessarily have an upcut because I'm going to use a downcut bit. So what is somebody supposed to do when they find that the bit that they want to use is not here in Easel? One thing we suggest using is this other feature. And so in this case, I know I'm going to use a 1/4 inch upcut bit. So all I really need to enter here is the bit diameter. This comes in really handy if you have an engraving bit. Engraving bits have very small cutting areas as well. So you can always change this number, you know, if you've got a 1/4 inch bit, or if you've got a really, really small engraving bit, you know, this is where you can enter in those settings. So like I said, I'm going to be using a downcut bit, and it's going to be a 1/4 or an 1/8 inch. I'll go ahead and set that. And one thing that's cool about importing the leaf the way that I did is that this outline will always be the same diameter as my bit. So let's say, just for fun, I want to try carving this out with a really, really small bit. You'll see how my line changed to match the diameter of that bit. So since I don't necessarily want to use a bit this small, since all I'm really doing is cutting the design out, I'm going to go ahead and stick with my 1/8 inch bit for now. And you can see again that the line changed to that. So you might be asking, why would I use the full filled in shape and import it with outlines instead of just using a shape that has outlines? So let me show you what that would look like. I'll go ahead, I'll go back to image trace. I'll upload another file here. And this is one that I found that has the shape cut out as an outline. So you can see here, it had a copyright on it, a watermark. So we're just gonna pretend that's not there. And that's when threshold comes in handy, because I can kind of change it to say, you know, if I put it all the way up here, you can see that watermark comes in. But if I drop it down a little bit, we can kind of get rid of that. And I'm also gonna use the smoothing feature again, just to make sure all these sharp edges come in nice and smooth. And since it's already an outline, I don't need to use the trace outlines. So I'm gonna go ahead and import that. So now I have two leaves here, but watch what happens when I change my bit diameter. You'll see that the diameter of the outline of this shape changed to match the bit diameter, but this shape did not. And if I use the simulate feature here, which we're going to be using a lot lately, if you haven't used it, it's a great way to check out and see exactly what your machine is going to do when it carves. It's super handy. You can see that my project right now is going to take 2.5 hours, which is a really long time for a carve that's as small as this one. So I'm not going to do that, but you can see why this difference exists. If I zoom in really closely, you can see how this project, or this leaf here, each tool path is just one stroke of a bit. But if I go over here, you can see how there's multiple layers of that 32nd inch bit trying to fill in this shape. So if I go back to my 1/8 inch bit and simulate it again, now it only takes 25 minutes. But because it's trying to use that 1/8 inch bit to fill in this whole shape, and there's not enough, some parts are too narrow, you can see I'm getting that red error. And that red arrow is telling me that my design will not carve correctly on the machine. So this is why I like to use, when I import things and I want to use an outline, that's one of the reasons I like to use the make outline feature of the image trace tool. So now that we've got this done, we've talked a little bit about bit size. Before I get too much further into this project, I want to back up a little bit and talk about these features, these other tools and features that are up here. As I talked about, we're going to be using Padauk, or Padauk, or however it is pronounced. But if I go into my materials here to select my material, I don't see that option here. And I know that that's really frustrating because it's always this, setting your material and setting your bit size is what determines your cut settings. So we have built into built into Easel, we have these recommended settings for every material and every bit that we have in this catalog here. So when a material is not here, I know it's really frustrating because you don't necessarily know if these settings are going to be correct. Maybe it results in a broken bit, or maybe it results in your project not coming out as smoothly as you would have liked. So when thinking about your material, in this case, I know I have an African hardwood. So birch plywood is probably not the most comparable material for me to be carving on. I want to try to find a material that's got the same density and hardness as the material I'm using, because that's going to be what gives me the best settings for doing this particular project. So I talked to some of my colleagues and they said Babinga, which is just so much fun to say, they said Babinga is probably a good choice because it's also a hardwood. So in this case, I'm going to use Babinga as my material. And you can see, let me back up a little bit. Let's pick a really soft material, like, we can go back to the birch plywood here. So you can see that these are the settings that it's given me. The feed rate determines how quickly my machine is going to work, how quickly it's going to move along its path. So in this case, it's going to move 24 inches per minute. The plunge rate determines how quickly the z-axis drops, and the depth per pass tells it how deep my bit is going to go each time it makes a tool path. So in this case, it's going to go 0.05 inches deep every time it carves. If you check out something like aluminum, which is the hardest material that we suggest that you carve on your machines, you can see my feed rate is half of what it was. My plunge rate is a third of what it was, and my depth per pass is a whole hundredth less than it was. So that tells me that aluminum is a really hard material to carve, and I really want to use more conservative settings, which will help minimize not only noise, but also the likelihood that I'm going to break a bit. So if I go back to Bubinga, which as I said is the most comparable material that I can find to work with this Padauk, I've got a similar feed rate to the birch plywood, a similar plunge rate. My depth per pass is a little bit less, which tells me that this is a little bit of a harder wood, so we're going to just be a little bit more conservative than if we were using the birch plywood. The other thing that I want to do here, before I get too far into my project, is to set my material dimensions. So in this case, my material was an 1/8 inch thick. Look at that. Look at this error I got. So what's happening here is already my project, my leaf that I've drawn over here, is too deep to allow me to change this in Easel. So what I have to do is I have to select my shape, make sure that the depth is less than 1/8 of an inch, and then I can go back over here and change that. And you'll see that the gray corresponds to the depth of my cut. So I'm going to set this to cut all the way through, since I want to go all the way through my material. And then this particular material that I have is a 6 by 12. Oops, the other way. Do as I say, right? Not as I do. All right. So there it goes. And a couple other things happened when I set my shape to cut all the way through. You'll see I got these little marks, and we like to call these tabs. Tabs are really important in CNCing to make sure that when you're cutting out a shape, that your shape doesn't come completely loose from the stock material around it. What happens when you're carving out a shape is if your machine carves this entire shape out and carves all the way through, it's pretty likely that your shape is going to come flying off the wasteboard or get caught in the bit or come damaged in some other way. So tabs help prevent that from happening. You can see that the tabs appeared here in my design with these little yellow lines. And if I wanted to, I can move them around to put them in more strategic places for carving. So one of the downsides about tabs is that it does require you to do a little bit of extra finishing when you finish your project. And if you guys are anything like me, I like to have my projects come out with as little finishing as possible. So in this case, if I wanted to, I could minimize the number of tabs. Maybe I say, oh, you know what, I'm only going to do 2. It's a small project. I can probably get away with that. Or if it's a really big project, I can always use more tabs if I want to do that. Make the whole thing tabs if I really felt ambitious. And you can also change how deep the tabs are, basically how much material is left, keeping those two parts together. But as I said, I like to save time, and I like to have as little finishing as possible. So in this case, I'm going to be a little bit daring. I'm not going to use any tabs. So what does that mean when it comes to clamping my material? One of the things that we like to do here at Inventables a lot is we use double-sided tape to enhance our clamping mechanisms in projects like this. So even though I'm still going to clamp my material down to make sure that it stays secure during the course of my carve, I'm also going to line the back of my material when I carve it with double-sided tape. You can use carpeting tape, any other kind of double-sided tape. I think ours comes from Uline. I'm sure we can provide you with that link if you're interested in figuring out what exact product we use here in-house. But that really helps because now when my shape carves out, this part of my shape that will be loose from the stock material won't move from when it's being carved. It'll still stay stuck to the wasteboard. And then afterwards, I just use a putty knife and I just pry it up and it's ready and good to go. So that's a little bit about how I'm going to prepare my easel project for getting the rest of this design in place. I wanted to do that before I got too far along because there's nothing worse than getting started with the project and then finding out when you're almost done with it that you have to go and you have to change something. So let's take a little bit more in-depth look at this particular leaf. So This leaf has a couple things going on that I would not use in an ideal carving situation. For one, I've still got a lot of these weird pokey kinds of lines, which are just going to take up more time carving than I want to spend. I've also got this kind of strange situation happening where I've got like a little hole where you can see when I imported it, there was a little bit of an error going on. And perhaps most importantly, I've got this stem. And this stem, even though it's not even carving out all the way, it's also a really fragile aspect. And I decided with my particular project that I don't think I really need the stems on my design because I think that you can still see that it's a leaf even without the stems. So I want to go ahead and remove that stem. So there's a couple ways in which you can fix this, these things that are going on with this project. The one thing that we have is this edit point tool or point editing. You can see all the points on your project by double clicking on it. You can also go ahead and hit the E key on your keyboard, or you can click edit points. So what this allows me to do is move around the points on my project. I can do all kinds of weird stuff by editing these points. So that's something that's really easy to keep in mind, but looks like I don't want this to carve out. So I'm just gonna go ahead and undo these settings. You can use Command Z on your keyboard if you have a Mac. You have unlimited undos for any live or any active easel project that you have going, or you can use, I believe it's Control Z on your PC if you wanna use that. So while I could go in here and try to edit this all down, that might be a little bit of a pain for this particular stem, because it's kind of annoying the way it kind of stretches down here. And the same with this little nuzzle knobby thing over here. So one thing I'm gonna do, which you can do when editing points, is you can also delete points. All you have to do is select a point and hit delete, and it's gone. And you can see that the little blue dot shows that it moved to a different point in the same area. So I'm just gonna keep deleting these dots in this particular area until my blue dot disappears. Now I've got this little guy hanging out here. Oops, thank goodness for undo. So I got this little dude hanging out here, which is kind of annoying because now it's kind of hard to click on it. How do I get it deleted? So I'm going to use a technique that we call masking. And masking is one of the fun little tips and tricks that we like to do here at Inventables to kind of hack our projects a little bit. Basically what masking does is, as I mentioned earlier, anything that's black is going to carve all the way through a project. We can see that illustrated here. Anything that's white will not be carved. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and make this shape, and I'm just going to put it over this little dot. I'll rotate it, make sure it fits in the nicely in there. And if you look at my project over here, that's gone now. I simply just covered up that shape and it no longer appears in my project. And that is a really quick and easy way to edit a project. If you've got a simple shape like this, I highly recommend masking. It's a great tool to kind of easily cover up parts that you don't want carved without actually changing your project itself. So maybe you have a part of your project that you want to carve out first and you don't want it to carve a different part of your project. Masking is a really easy way to cover something without actually changing your file. And that way you can always access it again later. So I'm going to do masking here on this stem part as well. It looks like I'm getting a bit of an error because of the two parts not being connected. So let's maybe try this instead. Try deleting these points and see if that fixes my stem problem. Looks like it's doing the trick. There it goes. All right. And then just to make it a little bit better, I'll move that in there, call it good. So it looks like we don't have to mask that part after all. And then if I want, I can just go in here, maybe clean up some of these other points, try to smooth this out. Really all I'm doing is deleting lines or deleting dots and just trying to simplify my design a little bit. All right, that's looking a little bit better. A little bit less complicated. The less complicated designs that you can use in your projects, the better your carves are going to be because your machine will not have to work as hard, and you'll also save yourself on using your bits too. You can basically just sort of simplify your project to the point where your bits don't have to be used as long, and that's a good way to extend the life of your bits, especially those really small bits, 16th inch or 3/4, or sorry, 1/32 inch. That's a really good way to extend the life of those. Oops, see what happened there? I moved my leaf, and in doing that, I moved my masking part. So I'm gonna undo, because, look, we got another little guy. Let's go cover him up too. All right, we got him covered up. Everybody's happy now. But we're gonna do one last thing. We're gonna go ahead and combine all of those shapes together so that next time I move my leaf, it doesn't affect the rest of my, I don't have to move all these parts together. So by combining the shape, it'll make it all one piece, and these masking parts will essentially become fully covered in the project. So I'm gonna go to Edit, Combine, and then switch it back here to Outline. Let's see here. Okay, I can maybe move that over a little bit. I don't know why it's doing that. This is always the fun part of learning something on the fly, right? Is you don't exactly know all the time what's going on. So let's see if I can get that to combine correctly. I don't know why it's not cooperating. All right. You can see it's working on this one, but I don't know why it's not working on this one. So we're gonna go back to plan B, and we're just gonna delete these points. The joys of Easel Live, folks. We saw it here first. Even we don't know what we're doing all the time. All right, here we go. So now I'm gonna go back, I can set that up. You can see that my other point that was up here disappeared. My tabs came back, but I can just go ahead and click those off. And now I have the shape that I wanna carve out. All right, we're looking good. So the one other thing that I did, if you remember my project, is I also added text to my leaf. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add some text. Easel comes with all these different fonts installed in the program already. And for this case, I knew I wanted something that was not going to be too complicated. Lavendaria is a beautiful font. It's not always the easiest font to carve because it does have a lot of thin areas and a lot of little curlicues that make it a little bit harder to do at such a small size. So I chose this font here, Josephine, and I wanted to spell out the word thanks. So I figured that was short, that was easy to do. So what I did was I did one letter for each leaf. So in this case, I'm going to start with my T. And I know that I'm going to hang my garland from this side so it hangs down. So maybe I'll just rotate this for a second to make it a little bit easier to show what I want to do. So what I want to do is I want to have my T positioned on this leaf. And I also want to have it carved all the way out. And I'll make it a little bit bigger here, just pulling on it. You'll see that it scales proportionately, which is really helpful. And I've got my T. So if I simulate my project to carve this out, oh yeah, it doesn't like it because it's too big. Let's make it a little bit smaller so it fits in my material boundary. So what Easel will do is this dotted line here will always show you your material boundary, and the white area is going to be your full work area. So in this case, in my Easel project, I have my machine set to a CARVE. So this is the CARVE work area, and you can see my material on here. So if I hit simulate, it's going to take 5 minutes to carve this out. That's not too bad. Considering I have to do 6 leaves though, you know, that takes up about a half hour of time. So I want to try to see if I can shorten this anymore. The best way to do that is to take this T, and I'm going to make it an outline. And why is that? It seems like kind of an interesting choice, right? Well, one thing to think about is that all I want is for this T to be removed from my full shape. So even though I could do it as a fill and just make sure it's all carved out, my bit is going to take the time to carve every part of this T. In this case, the T is pretty small, so it might not be as powerful or impactful on my design overall. But if I make it an outline, Now the only thing that's going to happen is that my bit is going to just carve the outside of the T instead of taking the time to fill in this whole area while it goes. You can see now if I simulate it, now it's going to take like a minute less. So instead of 6 minutes, it's going to take 5 minutes. So that'll save me, you know, time. Even though this is a small project, I like to save as much time as I possibly can. And you can see from this part here that this shape, this middle part of the T will come removed. So my outline, my actual shape of my T will still be visible in the leaf itself. And I'll still get the effect that I want. What I did here with the outline is I set my tool path to go to the inside of the shape. That way I can still get the same size of the T that I want. If I went on the path, you can see my T got a little bit bigger because now my tool path is moving directly on the path of the font itself. And if I wanted to make a really big T, I could set it to outside. And now my tool path is going to be on the outside of the edge of the font. And you can see that is one of those situations that would, you know, I don't really want my T to be that big because this part might become a little bit fragile when it carves out. So I'm going to keep it set to inside. I'm pretty conservative when it comes to my carving. And this should hopefully be enough space around the shape of the letter that my carve will not be too fragile or breakable. So there we go. I got one letter done here. I covered a couple different things regarding tabs and through cuts and different texts, masking. We talked about simulation so we can see the project and how long it's going to take. And you can also see that even on my design here, you can still see I get some of those little red errors in Easel that tell me that my design is not going to carve these parts out. So even though that red sign in Easel can sometimes get a little bit scary, I like to use the simulate tool basically to show me like, well, yeah, I might not get the full detail that I want, but I'm still able to get the shape that I want, and I still get a project that I'm happy with. So just because you see those red lines in Easel is not always an indication that your project is totally wrecked and you're not going to be able to carve it. We always suggest using the simulate tool to see exactly what is going to carve out on your machine. And that's a really good way to just get a live preview of exactly what your machine's going to do. These red lines here show you your machine's movement. The blue lines show that it's carving. And then again, the simulation just shows you how long it's going to take. So I had a couple other leaves that I was going to upload here. I can just show you what I found here in Google. I had a maple that I was going to do as well. And again, lots of pointy edges. So I'm going to go ahead and smooth those out. And then I will mark trace outlines. All right, there we go. And I'll go ahead and set it to carve all the way through. I won't use my tabs. Got my other leaf here. And now I'm going to try, let's see if masking will cooperate with me this time, huh? Get this part over here. And since we're running a little low on time, I'm just going to show you what this looks like. And one more trick that I like to use with fonts to make it a little bit easier to get the fonts to be the same size from piece to piece. So I'm going to go ahead, try to combine these. There, it worked. All right, now I can set this to outline, remove my tabs. And again, since we're short on time, but you can see how I could continue masking or just delete those points. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this letter here, and you can use Control-C or Command-C on your keyboard if you want to copy. You can also use this. Just copy that T. I'm going to paste it again. And since I want to do this, I'm going to go ahead and rotate this just to show you what I want my final project to look like. And now I can just move this over here, but instead of a T, I'm going to double click. I'm going to write an H because that's what I want to use. Because I'm going to start spelling out my word thanks. Now you can see this H doesn't quite fit, which is a little bit inconvenient, right? So maybe what I should do is I should bring both of these shapes down in size a little bit so that my font stays consistent over the course of my whole project. So now I can put my H in here, put my T in over here, and if I go to simulate, I can see it's only going to take 9 minutes to carve both these out. And just to show you guys again, if I were to do filled shapes with these, it's going to take 11 minutes. So you can see that the longer your project gets, or the more detailed your project gets, the way these time-saving techniques really make a big difference. So I'll go ahead and do inside again. All right. And now, since, as I said, time is always of the essence, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys my final easel project that I ended up doing. So this here is, let's see if I can find it. I had it pulled up here. Ah, I know what we can do. All right. Got to find my mouse. All right. So in Easel, if you're ever looking for your old easel projects, you can always just click on the easel icon up here. You can see all your old projects. So in this case, I got my leaf garland. Go ahead and pull that up. And I've got all my leaves over here. This particular job, I had to run in 2 different jobs because my wood is a little bit smaller. And originally I wanted to do 2 colors, so that's why the letters are all out of order. But you can see, looking here, I had made, I'd used the masking tool on this A to try and keep that little triangle part from falling out of the middle of the A. So that's a good technique to use. Again, I just made a shape, masked over the A, and combined that to make that more like a stencil. So you can see now when my shape carves out that the middle part of that A will stay in the A shape for me. And the other thing I did is I rearranged my letters a little bit to try and optimize the carving material that I have. So I'm able to fit 3 letters on each carve that I do. So I was able to complete this in 2 carves. It took me about 17 minutes to carve each leaf pattern. So I did 2 carves of 17 minutes each. And another thing to think about when you're looking at your final project is how you're going to clamp your material. So as I talked about, I did use double stick tape and I lined the back of the entire piece of material with double stick tape. But once I was looking at my wasteboard and I was looking at easel, I realized I had to find a way to fit a clamp in here and a clamp here, a clamp down here. And then just because I'm a heavy clamper, I clamped one up in this corner as well. So you can definitely use easel to help see what where are good spots to clamp your material. And it's a good thing that all the wasteboards have that grid on them, so I could see roughly, you know, I want to look at this 6-inch mark at the top of my material to make sure that I clamp this right around this area so that I don't get in the way of carving my shapes. Now let's say you happen to accidentally hit your clamp with your bit or something like that. Trust me, it happens all the time. Don't worry, all the clamps that we have and even our wasteboard are designed to be, I don't want to say destroyed, but we do it so that if something happens, we try to make sure that your bits do not get broken and that your project is not compromised. So all of our clamps are made out of like a softer material so that if they get hurt, that's okay. You can always make more clamps. We have plenty of projects for clamps on our website. And we can also send you more clamps. You can always buy them online. Same with wasteboards. You can always just swap that in with a new piece of MDF, or you can buy wasteboards on our website as well if you're interested in doing that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check in with my colleagues. I know my friends Sam and Paul have been on chat with you guys today, answering any questions. I'm going to touch base with them really quickly and just see if they happen to have any questions for me. So I'm going to let them go ahead and get those questions up for me. Now, any cleanup that you have to do on your final project, I'll just address that really quickly since I did have to do a little bit of cleanup. So what I did was once I pried off the material from my wasteboard, all I did was just have to peel off that double stick tape, and there was a little bit of powder, like a little bit of wood dust on the edges. I just wiped that off with my hands and I was good to go. So I'll just do a little close-up here of my final project. You can see that when I originally made this, I did not do the stenciling of the A, because I'm still pretty new at carving myself. But one of my colleagues recommended the A. That was actually Paul, who's chatting with you. And so I would definitely recommend doing that, because even though I like this A, you know, it does kind of look a little amateurish. And then, yeah, these are the leaves that I did. I did 3 different kinds, and I just kind of laid them out here like this just to show you guys what I did. And I'm really excited. I'm gonna go take this home for Thanksgiving and hang it up in our house as we all gather around Thanksgiving table. Good for Friendsgiving too, all good reasons to give thanks. So, and you can see how beautiful this wood looks. Because my leaves were rotated, I actually got a little bit of different designs on each one, which was really cool. So again, please feel free, send in your questions to the Q&A. Be happy to answer anything on the air right now. Let me just put this back up here, hold on. We have lots of cool projects here in our, we call it our library, because we just keep all of our projects that you guys send to us. We like to have them on display here in our office to share with the world. I see you guys have all been very, very busy here answering questions from us. If you have any feedback to send as well, please feel free to leave that in the chat. You can also email us at help@inventables.com. Great resource for answering any questions that you might have about Easel, your machine, materials, bits. The one last thing I'm going to show you, because it's speaking as someone in CS, I like to use the resources that we have available for all of you on our website. So pull up my screen really quickly, and I like to use our support center. And our support center is great if you have any questions. Really easy to just go in here, search for what you're looking for. One feature that we went over today, right, was the image import. And we have a whole walkthrough tutorial on here that takes you through some of the things we talked about. You'll see there's some little GIFs here that give you a little bit more detailed information about how to do what we just covered. So this video, we are gonna make it available for people to see. So if you need to reference this again, you can certainly do that. If not, the support center is a good place to go to check out some different tutorials. If you're interested in more about some of the cut settings, I know I kind of went through that, but that's something that's really important to take into account when working with your projects. This cut depth and depth per pass is a really cool resource to learn more about how to save time with your cuts, and also how to optimize your projects to get everything coming out really nicely. The one last thing I'm going to show you here in the support center, oh, not in the support center, sorry. I'll just show you here. I had material I was talking about, the Padauk, we're not exactly sure how it's pronounced, but you can see you can buy it here if you're interested. The one I used here today was the 6x12 1/8" thickness, and it's got this really nice color that, as I showed you here, is something that we like to do. So we had a couple people asking about not cutting through the wasteboard. I know that's one of those tough things, because we all love our wasteboards. They all come so nice and new, and they're so pretty. They are unfortunately designed to be carved through. And if you've ever done a carve where you come up short, right? You're cutting something out and it looks great, and that final pass doesn't go through. That is like the worst feeling to possibly experience, because now you've got to run your whole job over again, or find a way to set your depth per pass to be the same thickness as your material is another technique you can do to avoid that. But it's just one of those things that's really annoying. So what I try to do when I measure my material, let's say like for this material, right, it's supposed to be an 1/8" thick. So that's 0.125 inches. When I was measuring it, it was actually 0.13 inches. So I measured it with a pair of digital calipers on multiple points in the surface, which is really important because some materials might have a little bit of a warp to them. This one kind of has a little bit of a bend to it. So it's really important not only to clamp your materials securely, but make sure when you're measuring it that you measure at different points around the surface. So what I did is I went with the largest number that I measured around the surface of this. And for me, it just meant carving through my wasteboard just a little tiny bit. But as I said, I would much rather have a very slight depth cut into my wasteboard than have to run my project over again or find a way to only carve that last toolpath down. So I know it's really tempting to not want to carve out your wasteboard, but you guys should really see some of the wasteboards that we have here in our office. They're in atrocious condition. So don't be scared about carving out your wasteboard. We can always provide you with a template to help make your own wasteboard at home out of a piece of 3/4 inch MDF if you ever feel that what you want to do is build a new wasteboard. You'd be surprised how much life you can get out of a wasteboard, even that has a lot of holes in it. Especially if you have a 1000mm X-carve, you're in great shape because you can always start a carve on the completely opposite side of your machine if you really wear down that bottom left-hand corner to begin with. It looks like I have a few more questions that might be coming in. Feel free to keep sending those in. We've got about 12 more minutes here. Is it possible to engrave on a non-flat surface? That is a very great question and a little bit tough to wrap your head around. The reason it's really important to have a flat surface is because there's not a way to tell your machine that you have a non-flat surface. So let's say you have like a bump or something in your wasteboard. You might notice that that bump is going to cause your machine to still make a straight line all the way across, which means your depth is going to be a lot deeper where that bump takes place than where it is flat around it. So unfortunately, with the capabilities of our particular machines, I don't recommend engraving on a non-flat surface. It's a little bit hard to tell your machine that you want to carve at those kinds of different heights. You might be able to build a file that accommodates for that. You will need a more complex 3D modeling software if that's the case. But if that's something you're really interested in doing, you might want to reach out to us at the support center. We can provide a little bit more ideas for how to make that possible. So again, if you guys have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us, help@inventables.com. We'll be on the chat for a few more minutes. If you have any other follow-up questions, hopefully we can just address those in the chat. In the meantime, I just want to thank all of you for playing along with our little experiment. Again, this is the first time we've ever done this. This is my first time ever doing this. It's been a lot of fun, and we hope to continue doing this. If this is something you like to do, if it's something you feel like you learned a lot, feel free to let us know. Again, we love feedback, good and bad. So we just like to know what works for you guys, how you like to learn, and what kinds of things you're interested in doing with our machines, our software, and all of our materials and bits. My name is Mo. I work in customer success. You can feel free to reach me at help@inventables.com. And thank you again for joining us. I hope to see you guys soon.